describe what Palantir is, what Palantir does?
Palantir supplies world-class software to some of the most important institutions in the world, especially those in the intel and defense world, America and its allies, and to commercial entities all over the world. The software is the underlying motor of their work. So it powers special forces, it powers a lot of the operations that are done, it powers the way in which intelligence and clandestine services all over the world do their work and in correspondence with civil liberties. And on the commercial side, there's 1,000 applications for our data integration motor and the full stack of software we provide. In a world where software is largely a complete and unmitigated disappointment, if not disaster, and comes in the category of useless or totally non-working, we supply software to the institutions that I think most of the people in this room believe support us, including the institutions that you run. That is not only useful, but in the clandestine context, often exceedingly useful, both in terms of finding our enemies and protecting our civil liberties.
So when you also, just another introductory question, when you consider the growth in big data analytics and software more broadly, it's been huge over the last decade, it's been huge over the last year or two. Where are we on the curve of that?
To your question, we are at the way beginning of a disruption where software and its execution end up being the determinant variable of military, clandestine, and commercial success. What you had with, you could call Silicon Valley or Tech Revolution 2.0, is that you had companies mostly on the West Coast of America that are the very best at executing on software and turning your data into a product which is so disruptive that they disrupt every company around them. And that revolution is at the beginning because companies like the companies that are represented here and all over America and all over the world are going to implement software and combine their business acuity, their operational acuity, and world-class software in an effort to create jobs, wealth, and prosperity, and also to succeed in the competition of business. So I would say, I think we will look back at this time as a converging point where software and where the hardware used to be dominant, now the software and execution will be dominant. And what you're already seeing now is that on the military, especially military and commercial front, countries and entities that are good at software have just an enormous advantage, even if nothing else works.
And clearly you mentioned all of the Silicon Valley growth in the last decade. And if you snapshot the market cap of tech companies and where it's headquartered, it paints a very clear picture of the US lead in this tech innovation, software innovation of the last decade. Today, if you snapshot what's likely to evolve over the next decade, would the US still have the same scale of lead over the world in terms of that level of innovation?
Well, it depends. Don't expect many people are actually tracking our company, but so I think there's a lot of what's very positive in America is we were born in Silicon Valley. I think we were the first company of our size to move. We moved our headquarters to Denver. I think there will be a wider distribution of tech companies outside of Silicon Valley in America. But to your question, America is, for lots of reasons, the best at building software. There are other countries that do it very well. If you look at Germany has some strong companies. Israel is very strong. There are other countries. But if you look at just purely on the vulgar metric of market cap, so the battleships of software tend structurally to be in the US. I think they will move from the West Coast further into the Midwest. I'm very happy with our decision to move to Denver for lots of reasons, including a lack of a complete monoculture that you have in Silicon Valley that you don't have in other places. I spent a lot of my adult life outside of America in Germany writing a PhD and then building our business. We have a large business in Japan. We have a large business in Europe, and then to some extent in other places. But there's a convergence of intellectual veracity, pragmatism, and I would say Midwestern ability to do teamwork. That software is very much a team sport. It's a believer sport. So if you compare cultures I know pretty well, Germany, France, these are cultures with very, very deep engineering cultures, very, very highly qualified engineers, mathematical acuity that certainly rivals, and in some cases better than what we would be able to produce. However, we in America are much better at having a crazy dream. Our crazy dream was, as an example, we are going to give clandestine services and the U.S. military the very best software in the world. The way in which software was procured in the U.S. was they would give out billions of dollars for products that were built over years. And one of the really interesting things about software, and one of the big advantages we have in building software in America, is a lot of the common sense assumptions we have about software are just not right. So the common sense assumption a lot of people had in the US government was if you spent $10 billion and you had 10,000 engineers, you would have a better product than if you spent $30 million and you bought it from a completely mad looking CEO and a motley crew of people that looked like they're 12. And this is false. And so we got the US government to buy products instead of services. We said that you could solve civil liberties and solve targeting in the same time. So software has a unique attribute. You can take two difficult problems that are contradictory and solve them at the same time, like finding terrorists and protecting civil liberties, like lowering costs and having better software. Along comes a small company that says, look, we believe it's really important that we show you the software works before you buy it, that you pay attention to civil liberties, or as they call it outside of America, data protection, that you buy a product and not services, that we can scale across all these things, that we can provide certain kinds of security attributes and stability of code you can't have with one-off products. Sounds bonkers crazy. And they changed. And this happened in a relatively quick amount of time. So it's like, I think America's going to do very, very well in the software front. Now, there's a caveat to your question, which is how does that translate into our military? And that, in military and defense, having the best software companies in the world doesn't mean you have the best software in the context of the U.S. Efforts to defend itself and rival our adversaries, especially in kind of the AI context. There, I think America's made great strides and very optimistic, much more optimistic than we were years ago, precisely because we've changed procurement, because of the realization that people running these things in a clandestine military services realize that America can do very well and win, but not if it's bringing the 50,000 hours of services and that whole thing instead of rallying our very best of the best to our cause. Now, I don't think everything the U.S. government does is right. I don't agree with a lot of things. I'm a citizen, and like many people, I'm sure everyone listening, we have our agreements and disagreements. But the odd reality that many in Silicon Valley are not willing to support the U.S. government in military context is something that should be a source of great discussion. And I, for one, always want to hear, well, if that's the case, how do you justify the fact that you're building your company in the U.S. and driving on our highways and getting protection from countries that are unhappy with the encroachment on their sovereignty simply because they don't want to offend the U.S. government and our taxpayers? So that is a really big issue in America that many of our software elites have a very different view on how you should support the country that has supported us than, say, we do at Palantir and I do personally. People in America see that we're creating value for them. And the Silicon Valley of the first generation was building things that Americans understood would help them. If you're sitting on your perch in Silicon Valley and you're only creating value for yourself, monetizing the natural resources of your fellow Americans and others in the form of monetizing their data and providing no value to them, except for disrupting the businesses that people work at, you're going to find that your level of trust, it goes really down really far quickly. And I don't think this is something you can kind of IQ your way out of, which is, I think, essentially one of the problems in Silicon Valley. They just think that they're so smart that they can smart their way out of this. As I mentioned, I believe we were the first company to leave the Valley. When we left the Valley, it was looked at as something completely crazily ridiculous. Who could leave the Valley? Now, lots of people are leaving the Valley. And part of the reason they're leaving the Valley is because the brand of the Valley is not good. And it's not good because they can't answer simple questions. What does your software do to help somebody? And the answer will be, I give a lot of money to philanthropy. Well, I'm all in favor of philanthropy, but there has to be a more direct answer. What does your business do? Or maybe there should be a more direct answer. Our company does nothing to help humanity, and we're okay with that. If, in fact, you are profit maximizing in your country, that country is protecting you, you have a duty to protect the country. So, I love academic debates of this sort, and I'd be more than happy to go down the rabbit hole of, at what point is it incumbent on someone to diverge from their actual economic interest and do good? And that's a really, really important debate. But in the context of we are the global winners of X, and we are partly the global winners because we are in a country, the answer cannot be we do not support that country. And that would be my first baseline. And then after that, we can have a more erudite debate.
In terms of it's a good time, I think, to come to the words mentioned in the title of this discussion about whether tech is a sword or a shield. But overall, despite the last 10, 15 minutes of our discussion, I presume your conclusion is today that it is much more a force for good than it is for bad. Is that fair?
So if you take our product, we power most of the clandestine services in Europe, the most data protection rich environment. You can't even sell your product in some countries in Europe until you prove the civil liberties protections will work, which in kind of more just plain terms means we can show exactly how the software is working, who actually touched the actual targeting package, how they touched it, what the data sources were in the European context, what was purged, what was not purged. However, any tech that actually does something effective can be abused, which is why there is always a need for like government sovereignty, governments being involved, citizen advocacy to understand. By the way, it's another reason why tech has to be built so it can be made transparent. In our case, it's so easy to like sell something. In many cases, these things don't actually work, but a black box, and it's like there has to be a way to take the box apart and see what's happening in the engine as a way of creating transparency. And to the introductory point, there's a crisis of legitimacy around these things. And there's a legitimate side of that crisis of legitimacy, which is these very sharp tools can be abused, will be abused if they're not looked at carefully. And then there's got to be a way that normal people can look at the tech and evaluate, is this being used? Under what conditions is it being used? And is it being used in a way that is either not legal or not ethical or something? Or do we need to change the law because our norms have changed around how the use of the tech should happen? But I do think every technical advance is something that could be abused. In aggregate, the advances are, much outweigh the dangers, but obviously there are dangers.
How important is it that the US maintains its innovation lead on the tech side so as either to be able to use it in a conflict if necessary, or rather to avoid the need for a conflict? Will the next conflict be sparked?
There's a lot of points here, and this would be where there's a legitimate intellectual disagreement between me and most people, I would say, in Silicon Valley. But the interesting thing about software is it's just nonlinear to the extreme. So we tend to want to believe things we're working on or things tech products we interact with are similar, and it largely comes down to taste. What do I prefer in X tech product versus Y? But de facto, I could switch, and there's usually a cost difference, and that may be more the case in hardware. It's not the case in software. So this is, again, back to why I think America will continue to produce world-class disruptive software companies. It's because there's a culture to do this. The culture is disruptive, and the output is totally nonlinear. So one country can spend $100 billion, and a small group of startups in Chicago can get financing worth $100 million, and they just massively outperform the country that spent $100 billion. If in fact our adversaries have the best software systems, software empowered systems, or in the end, pure software, which you could call advanced AI. AI is often thrown around as a jargon term, but in this context, military technology powered by somewhat or completely autonomous systems, or human-powered systems that also have autonomous capabilities. Those capabilities are not going to be even. It's not going to be one is here and one is here. It's one is in the at the moon and one is at a skyscraper range. So I believe if one country has a nuclear bomb and the other country has a set of dull knives, the country with the nuclear bomb is going to define how the world works. And at Palantir, we believe that to have the kind of norms that we want to live in the world, there has to be parity, at least parity, if not superiority, in the context of delivering software to America and its allies. Like, I think we should just, because we have so many disagreements with China and Russia on so many fronts, we should not ever underestimate how sophisticated these cultures and countries are at highly technological things. including software, but other things that sometimes involve weapon systems, but just involve other things that just involve in technology. These are highly developed, highly capable, worthy in the sense of they can produce things we can produce or better if we're not careful adversaries. And in both cases, certainly we would be remiss not to put our best foot forward. I would say in this context, one of the things that I believe is, in Palantir and in my years of building a company and running it, you really have to focus on your own business. So it's like the most helpful way to beat our rivals is to put our best foot forward, not to run around talking about how great they are. Obviously, we have to be aware of how strong they are. But America is more than capable, especially in the software context of winning. But it is very much the case of putting our best foot forward. And to your point, if we do not put our best foot forward, we won't win.
Have you engaged with both the Trump administration and now the Biden administration on this? And has there been a change in response? Are you encouraged by the response?
Well, it's funny. We've worked with, our software's been deployed under 4 presidents. The level at which these things happen is like us engaging with, say, someone running a part of the DoD or a part of a clandestine service. These are highly capable professionals, but we're very engaged along a whole series of these issues, many of which we're obviously not really allowed to say much about under the last 4 presidents, and very hopeful that we'll be very engaged under this president.
How do you entice a company to do business with you? What's your pitch to them?
Well, the thing is, we have a number of the more important companies in the world using our products. So like in just as an example, 3M, Chrysler, Fiat, Rio Tinto, BP is a very, very long list. And a lot of our growth, both in commercial and in government, is concentric circles of people saying, hey, why is it that ABC doesn't work? And in the beginning, in the Intel's play services and DoD and in commercial, it's like, well, why don't you call that motley company we've heard of with the crazy looking CEO with the 12-year-olds? Because, we've heard that the software works. Enterprise software is kind of a thing where people often struggle to understand what its utility is. We went from use case to use case, basically. Now, we have a technical thing in both commercial and government where we believe we're supplying software the way it'll be supplied in 5 years. So in the government context, we said we would supply, instead of one-off systems bespoke, built with literally a million hours of human labor and with a cost of $1 billion, we'll install our software in weeks at a cost. Often, we used to go to clients in the government space and say, it'll be 1% of the time, 5% of the cost, pay us when we've installed. Now, in the government context, they often can't just pay you afterwards. But in the commercial context, we would say the same thing. In the beginning, we largely built our business around companies that were having a crisis, and the CEO was very frustrated because they couldn't figure out why they couldn't rebuild or do A, B, C, D, why it was going to have to take 8 months instead of what seemed to be something you could do. And there are very technical issues under those questions. In the commercial space, we have somewhat of a radical view. This is purely technical. This is not how we entice the clients, but our view is that in 5 years, a great number of people are going to buy software the same way they buy every other technical product. They're not going to, like when we're talking here, you didn't install the 15 things into the camera, put it together and decide that your Frankenstein monster would be a great way to do this interview. You bought a finished product. Mm-hmm. Palantir, what makes Palantir Foundry so unique and the way we manage it, Apollo, is that you can buy the whole stack. It'll be installed in a couple days, and you will not have to have 1,000 products sewn together by a massive IT organization. However, we also believe, and this is totally counterintuitive, but is actually a truism software, that the individual parts of that stack can be sold as modules, each of which is superior to the modules that you could otherwise buy from other companies, because the individual modularity is actually not in contradiction to building the whole stack. They actually reinforce each other. So what's unique technically is in both government and in commercial is the way we actually deliver the software and the speed with which we can deliver it. And in the beginning, in both cases, we didn't even bother with that because it was like, look, you have a crisis, we will solve it. And after that, you can buy our software. For years and years, we insisted in the commercial space of doing it for free. Why? I'm doing the pilot for free. Why? Because people are legitimately skeptical of software. All these software companies seem to have the same jargon on their website. How would you ever tell the difference between one person's jargon and another's? If you're not a software engineer, it's very hard to evaluate the difference between jargon that makes no sense and is like largely a waste of your time and something that actually can help you. My real answer is like, look, it's very hard to evaluate software. If you're a software engineer, we can explain to you technically. But you could also just call these 5 clients. You know, Palantir, in all modesty, we have the very best client list in the world. And that's despite having me as the front man. They're like, how does that happen? It's like, the best way to evaluate software is say, okay, that sounds kind of interesting. Let me talk to someone who used it. Let me do a pilot and do it on some problem you actually care about, not some esoteric problem. And then see, well, does it work? What are the costs? And, why is the thing I've invested in? And if there's only some part, like we have this great partnerships with IBM and AWS. Another thing to look at is, again, who are their partners? I mean, we have a client list. I would say no other company in the world has a client list like ours on the clandestine service company list. And then we have these partners, IBM, AWS. I think those are 2 of the most notable, most interesting software companies that human history has produced.
All of the company names you've just listed are big, big companies. Is there a risk for smaller companies out there, even if you offer free service for a trial, that they get left behind over the next decade because they're scared to deploy capital on new expensive tech, and they should have done perhaps, but up front, and they haven't done?
Small, medium-sized companies are going to be very, very good for Palantir. So I'm highly biased here, but it's because, most medium-sized companies have just enough soft money to pay for software that can be transformative for them today and no money for waste. And we love those companies, and they're going to be very happy with us, I believe. And so we look at them as a massive opportunity. And and often these smaller companies are, the smaller the company, the easier it is to know exactly what's being spent and how. And so, it's true. We have brand name, I would say among the best brand names in the world using Palantir, and those contracts are very, very large because, I think it's publicly reported, one of our clients said they making $1 billion a year off of using our product. And of course they pay us sums of money a small company could never pay us. But of course it's just it's a relatively modest portion of what they're making. I would tell you the other thing that I think the smaller companies just have to be very, very adaptive and hungry. It's and software, again, it's an unfair sport. You can be smaller. If you execute on software, you will do very well against people who have resources that are 10 times your size. Look at our little tiny company. We started not very long ago with 5 people. We are by far the most important company in supplying software to governments in the West. And they're really no second. And so how does that happen? So you can go from small to big very quickly. I think this is also something American companies are really, really good at, being adaptive, changing, throwing out ideologies that don't work, working with people that you may never worked with before. This is a cultural attribute of the USA. And I think one that we, Palantir, are going to benefit and are benefiting from enormously already.
You teed up the IBM AWS partnership there. Some would have thought you guys would all be rivals. So what exactly are you doing with them?
Well, I mean, first of all, the IBM AWS need no introduction, and they don't need me or Palantir to extol their virtues. IBM is one of the, is the oldest, maybe has the largest global footprint of any software company in the world, is just absolutely dominant in certain jurisdictions. AWS is this product juggernaut run by very, very technical people. It was very easy for us to work with them because 75% of us are engineers. The last other 20% of Palantir are highly quantitative, and so these are great product companies. You could say that we should be adversaries, but what we've learned in our work, both in the clandestine military service and commercial, is companies at their level of talent and technical acuity know how hard it is to build what we've built. And so it's a very quick, it's much quicker, easier discussion with companies like this on how you partner, because we know what we have. We're not entering their space, and perhaps they could enter our space, but they know how hard it is, because building what we've built, especially the parts of the stack they want, like in IBM's case, it's a modular. They want some of our modularity, a part of our stack, but not all of it. Very hard to do. And then in AW's case, we're partnering on a number of use cases. They also know how hard it is to do. And then we respect their cultures. We work very well with them. And so if you meet cultures that you work well with because of deep engineering prowess and similar kind of ideas of what would work and not, then then it's very easy to sort out, well, here we should work together, here we shouldn't, because you have a pretty clear and deep understanding of the enormous problems that IBM has solved, that AWS has solved. We have no interest in trying to solve those problems. And I think they have a fair deal of respect for what we've done in a very short period of time. And so like when we make these claims that, quite frankly, some on Wall Street have thought have been mad, like, we're providing software that in its totality, you can buy it once, or its modularity is the best on the market. And that's how, and by the way, people will buy software in a different way. That seems mad maybe to someone looking at this from the outside. It doesn't seem mad to among the two best software companies in the world, because they know how difficult it would be to do that. And they can evaluate that what we're saying is absolutely true, and they can do that very quickly.
I wanted to ask about being public. You've mentioned the short-termism in the past that can come out of Wall Street by having to report every quarter. And clearly you're more in the public eye in the crosshairs once you're a public company. Going public and wonder sometimes whether it would have been better to stay private or not.
It's like we're used to being in the resistance in some ways at Palantir. We fought large bureaucracies for the good of this country, I believe, and to some extent won. And we are, to some extent, battling away with short-termism on Wall Street, which I think is one of the most destructive, corrosive attributes of an otherwise interesting and largely functioning system. We told the Wall Streeters that we will focus on building the long-term health of our company, that we are going to invest in our product development and in our clients first and foremost. And then, you just have to battle it out with them. But, I would say from the perspective of Palantir, we've been at this a long time. I have a lot of people at Palantir who stayed at Palantir because they believed in our company, and to some, because they believed for reasons that sometimes are hard to understand, and I struggle to understand, and they believed in me. And they, unlike many people in tech, their share price was both going in the wrong direction and illiquid, and they stayed for years and years and years and years. And now those people have shares that are actually quite valuable, and I'm very proud of that. And, I think despite the fact that we have to battle it out, we've been battling it out with Silicon Valley and venture for people. Now we have to battle out the short-termism of some people, not all people on Wall Street. And that may be the price, but I'll tell you, the fact that these people at Palantir that have been at Palantir for a long time, that stayed while all their friends who may not be helping the world very much were making big money, and their share price was both in the wrong direction and illiquid. I'm very happy for them, and it makes my life better too, because I feel even freer. I don't have to wake up in their service every day, or still wake up in their service, but I don't feel imprisoned by my responsibility to free them from a share price that was pretty bad for them. So it's a mixed bag in some ways, but I think for most people at Palantir, especially the people who built the company below me, it's been very important for them, and I view that as very important for me too. And if the price is we've got to move our battle from exposing Silicon Valley's weaknesses to exposing the short-termism of some people on Wall Street, then that's the price.
You've been in the crosshairs in a good way on the Wall Street Bets Reddit forum. Did you keep an eye on that? Is there an aspect where you worry, gosh, it's been too hot in the short term, that means next year people are going to be asking me why the share price is falling? Do you worry about that?
Well, I mean, of course you worry about a lot of things when you're somewhat neurotic and introverted. I'm not saying it's never occurred to me, but I have a lot of other worries that worry me a lot more. And I like the so-called retail investors for lots of reasons. First of all, unlike many people, they're investing their own money with no safety net. Many of them are engineers, so they actually go out and evaluate our product. And by the way, they dispel a lot of kind of what I would call slanderous critiques of Palantir written by people that don't ever seem to have engaged with our product. And so I really like these people. I'm very happy we DPO'd. As some of when you DPO, you give investors a chance to make money and not just big hedge funds on Wall Street. I'm very proud that normal people investing their own money with their own risk, making their own opinion, made a lot of money. And we are working at Palantir for a long-term outcome. What I would say to everybody, you, your audience, retail investors, we're in this for the long haul. If you are speculating or you are, or you're thinking about the short term, there are plenty of other things to invest in. We're building the company we believe in. We're going to do it for the long haul. There'll be ups and downs. My lawyers won't let me say more than that, but it's obvious. And if you want something else, it's a huge world. Buy some other stock. You don't have to buy Palantir. No one's forcing you. We're completely liquid. Do something else. There are a lot of other great companies, less great companies. Who knows? Everyone has their thing. I'll see you in a couple years, and we'll see how we've done. We're busy in our working in our shop, basically, building the products of the future, delivering them in the present. And we're not planning to really change to make anyone particularly happy in the short term.
What is the single best and the single worst decision you made as a CEO over the last decade?
Well, the single best decision I made was personally being involved in the hiring of the first 350 people and then building a culture with them. And it's those people and that culture that has powered our everything good about Palantir. That I've made so many bad decisions. I mean, I wouldn't even know where to start there. But I mean, I honestly think my life was like, besides starting Palantir and probably getting a PhD in Germany, was like kind of a lot of bad decisions. And then, in the context of Palantir, we make bad decisions all the time. We correct. Our first commercial product was an unmitigated disaster. We didn't correct it quickly enough. We've, sometimes made hiring mistakes. You make a lot of mistakes in business, but in any case, I know the best decision I ever made was hiring the first 350 people personally, helping to instill the culture that became Palantir and being a shepherd of that culture.
Thank you very much.
No, thank you. Thank you for the questions, and thank you to your audience.